The Bruins start a new era tonight as they take on Utah at home, and it's the first game under new head coach Joe Sacco, who has been with the team for a decade now, and obviously no shortage of hockey experience, especially in the Boston area. Medford guy. He shot it down today. They asked Medford or Melrose. He's like, I don't know where Melrose came from. I'm a Medford guy. It's good. It's a little more blue collar. Medford guy. Played at BU. Played at Medford High, by the way, which you don't see anymore. Public high school hockey going right to BU, which is what he did. BU Terrier under Jackie Parker in the oft-forgotten 80s run, and played in the league for years. Has had coaching experience in Colorado. Was not great overall. His overall record was 130, 134, and 30. Made the playoffs once, did not win that series. They lost to San Jose in 2010. That was his first year as the coach, and it got pretty much worse. So he goes from second in the division to fourth, a slight bump up to third, to then last in the division where they really bottomed out 16, 25, and 7 before he was fired. That was the strike-shortened season. But what it got them in Colorado was Nathan McKinnon. So a big thanks to Joe Sacco there. I was on the radio, Zach, with Mosley the other day, who leaned into this Bruins thing because they had just fired Montgomery. And Mosley, Texas guy, admittedly does not know a ton about hockey.
Yeah.
And he goes, Joe Sacco will be the new head coach. Certainly remember him from his playing days. And I didn't say it on the air, but I was like, no, you don't. You don't know who Joe Sacco is. You are confusing him with Hall of Famer Joe Sakic. That's who you're confusing him with. I mean, that's who you remember from your playing days. It is close. Name-wise.
Honestly, I'm
very different players.
I don't mean to make it sound like but I'm surprised that he brought up that. He just doesn't seem like much of a hockey guy.
I'm stunned he brought it up at all. We do a show in Central Texas the day after an embarrassing Cowboys loss, and the first segment he's appealing to me to talk about the Bruins head coaching change.
That's nice, but hey, that's probably nice. That was better news than.
Yeah, I think he just didn't want to talk about the Cowboys. Anyway, Jim Montgomery out. I almost said Bruce Cassidy. Jim Montgomery out. Joe Sacco in. Don Sweeney talked to the media after our show yesterday and had interesting comments about this extension talk. Remember, Jim Montgomery went into the season on the last year of his deal, and extension was obviously never done, and he was fired. And here's what Don Sweeney had to say about the change in head coach and those extension talks and where they went.
It came from a decision of our team really just not performing to the level of expectations that we have grown to appreciate as a fan of the sporting community here. And, for me, I had to change course. It's not generally been my nature to not enter into a relationship. I've worked with a lot of people over an extended period of time, unless they've gone on to other situations. And in Monty's case, we had entered into extension talks, couldn't find a deal based on what we had offered, and then when the underperformance of the team reared its head for 20 games, I had to make a decision. And moving forward, that rests with me now. From a personnel standpoint, and the players themselves, they have to understand that they're not where they need to be, and we're either going to get back there or there'll be continued changes across the board.
Now that really interests me, what he said in there about the relationships as well as the extension talks. He basically admits in there, we didn't have much of a relationship, which is odd for Don Sweeney, apparently. But on the ice, you could see that there was a disconnect. There was absolutely a disconnect between what this front office wanted in a team and what this coach wanted in a team. And Elliot Friedman wrote his 32 thoughts about this morning. And Elliot does some great stuff, and he does a lot on this change. And I love this quote from Elliot's column here, because it's talking about what Don Sweeney said with that relationship. And it said, maybe we will never know the full story, but there are people who believe Montgomery was unsure about Boston even before they were unsure about him. That is damning. And that absolutely illustrates right there that the GM and the head coach were not on the same page at all. And that's going to include the president on the GM side too, because they're buddies, they're teammates. They would get down in the corners together. And when they fired Pete Chiarelli, the only outside guy they've had in 50 years, Cam Neely said, you got to bring in my guy, bring in my buddy, Donnie Sweeney. And look how it's turned out. And it does also paint a bad picture for Jim Montgomery, not just Don Sweeney here. Because what we saw was a team going through the motions for weeks, waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to get fired, someone to get traded for some kind of shakeup. And every time you looked on the bench, when these cataclysmic things were happening, Jim Montgomery's just sitting there with his hands in his pockets, doing the old Kevin James meme. Oh, what am I going to do? I'm going to be out of here in a couple weeks. He was probably waiting for something to happen too. And that's not good all the way around. And it's really showing that they did not come to an agreement on an extension. Because clearly Montgomery was seeing this saying, they're not going to let me have my team. They're not going to let me play the style I want to play. In fact, they're not even going to let me call up or send down whom I want to and from Providence. The GM is doing that? Really? I mean, I've watched Moneyball. I think the manager can do that. No, but seriously, like the head coach should have the autonomy to call up a player or send one down. And they have made that clear that is also not the case. Montgomery made it clear. And now Don Sweeney's saying there was no relationship and we couldn't agree to a number on a contract extension. I also wonder if you couldn't come to an agreement on the extension, why did he start the season? You had an out last year. People would have been just as critical as they are now when looking at his record. But you had an out last year. And if they had lost that game 7 to Toronto, if Toronto scores in overtime, then he probably is gone. But he buys an extra year because Pasternak scores. And they get embarrassed in that next round, but it didn't matter at that point. So why did we go into the season with a big-time Don Sweeney offseason, bringing in the guys he wants, and Montgomery probably doesn't want? Why is Montgomery starting the season as the coach? That's what's befuddling me about this whole thing. But now you've got your guy. You've got Joe Sacco, who's been on the bench for 3 different head coaches. He's been there for 10 years, clearly a Sweeney, Neely guy. And now there are rumors being thrown around, kind of unsubstantiated, that Joe Sacco knew he would have a good shot at this job in this season going into this season. The organization feels like a mess right now. It feels like an absolute mess from the players to the coaching staff to the front office. And maybe this Sacco era will be glorious. We had Matt Berry on yesterday saying he's going to get the full season. And I think the same thing. I doubt that they are just having a placeholder in for now while they go and find a great head coach by Christmas. I doubt that's going to happen. And I don't even know what kind of direction they'll go into. But I've already had it play out in my head that Sacco is going to get this team right for a short period of time because they do have some talent there. They're going to make the postseason. Maybe they beat Toronto again because they always do. But Toronto's a better team, so probably not. But they'll make the postseason. They'll get a fun 7-game series. They'll get that playoff gate. And they'll just keep them on. One of us. One of the Bruins. And we'll just repeat the cycle again. Because they don't have the leadership within the locker room that they need, clearly, as we have seen it precipitously fall since Bergeron left the team on a team that coached itself in 2022-23. So we're just going to go back in the same cycle. But if they make the playoffs, they make the playoffs, and everyone will have a little bit of hope because once you make it then, anything can happen. Tonight, you will have Joe Sacco behind the bench, and you will have Joonas Korpisalo between the pipes. Remember that. In 8 years when they're back in Stanley Cup contention. Remember that you'll say, I was there, I was watching when it was Joe Sacco coaching the team and Joonas Korpisalo in net. And Riley Tufte on the 4th line. And Pavel Zacha being your first line center. Remember that Bruins fans the next generation when they start winning again and start competing for the cup. That is my plea to you to remember that. Joe Sacco Era starts tonight. Catch that fever.
We are Rogue Media Sports.